Hi friends, Michael here. So every now and again I'll post some kind of video that what language am I speaking? That will upset a bunch of Polish people, or upset a bunch of Polish people on the internet. The internet reality versus the reality are sometimes very, very different. Granted, I don't go around uh, giving like 10-minute monologues about what I think about certain subjects in and around Poland, nor do I go around going, hey, I'm a Jew. So it's not like I encounter anti-Semitism in my real life, or philo-Semitism, or any ism connected to my Jewishisms. But I do that on the internet. I make videos like this where I say, hello, I'm a Jew from Canada, I'm Polish, yabba-dabba-dabba-boo. And I posted recently a short here on YouTube, and I also cross-posted that short on TikTok. And it's just very simply like a picture of me going from sad to smiling. And then I wrote the words, when you realize that your fear of Poland as a Jew has more to do with your trauma as a Jew than the Polish reality. For the most part on YouTube, I tend to get a pretty intelligent response to things, which is why I like YouTube a lot. But on TikTok, I post more just because I'm ADD. And it satisfies my need to constantly make things. The response was a response that I get pretty regularly, which is, why would Jews be afraid of Poles? Poles were saving Jews. And then for the people who get really angry, it's like, you should be grateful. Jews should be grateful. Why in Israel do they teach these lies about the Poles being responsible for the Holocaust, etc.? And this is not an infrequent a response that I get on the internet, on TikTok actually. Many people commenting on it. They didn't really understand. Well, I think they did understand that I was actually being critical of Jewish trauma, but but it was amazing. Like I sometimes feel, as much as I love Polish people, that they like to get angry about things, which I get because Jews do also. We're pretty similar in a lot of ways. So I wanted to just break a few things down because this feels important to me. Because, it ultimately always kind of comes down to this question of what should the Poles be sorry for? Or why do the Jews like the Germans more than the Poles? There's some good answers, in my opinion, to all of these questions. And so the first thing I'm going to talk towards is the Poles saving Jews, or the Poles betraying Jews narratives. And the reality being that most Poles during the war were doing nothing. Most of them were doing nothing. Well, that's not fair. Most Poles were trying to survive. They were trying to keep their families safe. They're trying to keep themselves safe. In order to save a Jew, you would have to put you and your entire family at risk. And it was very dangerous. And so naturally, and I say naturally because it's very important, because I do think that there is a natural human response to the wartime reality that most Polish people had, which was to do nothing because they were afraid of being killed. They were afraid of being murdered by the Nazis. Now, this is a reality that many of us don't understand. We understand it through the narratives of our grandparents and great grandparents. Um, our parents, but we don't actually know what that threat is like. Well, certainly I don't. Okay, and so to judge uh, anyone for making the decision that they don't want to put their own child in danger in order to save Jewish people is insane, in my opinion. And so the Jewish narrative that is negative in and around Polish people is connected to the fact that a lot of those who survived the war, uh, their narratives in relationship to Polish people were often like the neighbors who did nothing to help them. And in a lot of cases, because the reality is that there were some Polish people who were, you know, betraying Jews, and I use quotes because I just think that to judge anybody based on the insanity of the wartime reality is something that shouldn't be done. Just as there was a lot of insanity uh, in this like desire for Jewish people to survive, and in doing so, many Jews were taking on positions of authority given to them by Germans in the belief that this would be their pathway to survival. Survival, survival, survival. This is what people were dealing with. And yeah, there were some people who betrayed Jews. But you know what? This has nothing to do with them being Polish. This is just human nature. It would be the same for anyone if it was if it was switched and it was the Jews and the Poles were the ones who the Jews needed to save. I think the statistics would look exactly the same. Some would save Poles, some would not. Most would just try and survive. There's been very little education, to be honest, for Jewish people about the Polish people and the Polish reality. I went to Jewish school and I learned Holocaust in Jewish school, and I wasn't taught that the Poles were responsible for the Holocaust. That's not what I was taught, and I don't actually believe that that is the education that is taught in Jewish schools. Um, there's nothing taught. The Polish reality is not taught. We learn about the Nazis. We learn about Hitler. We learn about the Germans. We know that it was the Nazis. We know that it was the Germans. The narratives that we have and that Jews have internalized have been passed down by Holocaust survivors. Um, and that's what's been internalized by the Jewish people. That's where we have this information. And it's so riddled with trauma that it has to be, untangled for the Jewish people. But at the same time, in speaking to a lot of Polish people, I know that often Poles are taught in school that they were saving Jews, and that is a narrative that a lot of Polish people have internalized, it seems, and that's also not a true narrative, and that's okay. I, I don't blame Jews nor Poles for having internalized what they've been taught. And when it comes to this question of why are Jews okay with Germans more so than with Poles? And it's because of the work the reconciliatory work that's been done between Germans and Jews, a lot of it has been done. That work cannot be underestimated. But in the case of Germans, in a way, it's so much clear what that work needed to be. The Germans were the bad guys, right? And that's the accepted narrative by the German people. And so that reconciliatory work started happening a long, long time ago between Jews. And yes, it was connected to money, but that's not it. Like, I don't know Jews who are like somehow now rich because of Germans. My grandmother would get money from Germany, but it wasn't that much money. At the end of the day, it didn't really affect her life. But the fact of that money coming, or the fact of responsibility being taken, education, so much work that Germany has done, like to the point that like young Germans are like, we know we're guilty. Can we move on, please? We know that we're guilty, but we don't want to live with this burden. Just as that Jews don't want to live with the burden of, Holocaust trauma anymore, consciously or unconsciously. In Poland, there too needs to be reconciliatory work between Jews and Poles. But, that work is much more confusing because a lot of Poles would say, what should we apologize for? We did nothing wrong. And I would agree with that statement for the most part, right? But I think that the work that needs to be done in Poland, between Poles and Jews, has more to do with collective mourning. It has to do with collective mourning. I think that Poles mourn consciously or unconsciously the fact that they couldn't do more to save Jews. And I think in a way, the extraordinary mobility that the Poles achieved during the beginnings of the Ukrainian refugee crisis was connected to the fact, in part, that the Polish people could do something for Ukrainian people, but they couldn't do more for the Jewish people. And that's not their fault. This is not something that Poles should blame themselves for, nor should Jews blame them for. But I still think that the mourning process needs to happen because it's sad and traumatizing, deeply traumatizing. At the end of the day, I just there's so much blame and aggression being thrown around, a lot of defensiveness on all sides, and I'm in Poland. I think partly because I myself want to go through that mourning period, or the mourning process, because Jews have a lot to mourn. Of course, we lost so much in Poland. We lost the Jewish reality in Poland, and that's something that I mourn. I mourn. But the Poles also lost the Jewish reality. Poland lost the Jewish reality, and that's also something to be mourned. And so I don't think I realized this until having moved to Poland, but I believe that there's a mourning process that Jews and Poles can go through together. And I think it's also a process that can bring Poles and Jews together. Of course, when I say Poles and Jews, I mean kind of like diasporic Jews. When I'm like Jews outside of Poland, there are Polish Jews, of course. Jews who were born in Poland who identify as much as being Polish, as, if not more so than Jewish. But I think that there's a mourning process that can happen, and I think that this, in a way, is where that reconciliation needs to happen. I just think that somehow it needs to. There's something that needs to be acknowledged more widely, an acknowledgement that that was a major loss for everyone. And I think that there's a strangeness to the fact that the homes that were once Jewish homes still exist, but they're they're lived in by non-Jewish Polish people now. And again, I don't say this as something that Polish people should be blamed for, but it is a fact that this is the Polish contemporary reality. And I just think that we need to continue to work on it and think about it together, ultimately with the goal of love, of finding and being in love with each other. So, on that note, I love you. Thank you for watching this. This was whew, I want to say, like, complex for me emotionally video to record, and I hope that I did it justice, because it's something that I is important to me to communicate and to talk about, and it's important. This work that I'm doing on social media and in my life is, revolves around this, um, and you just sort of being here with me on my channel and watching this is a part of that work. So thank you very much. Oh, I keep forgetting to say this, but if you want to support this work, because it's hard and I enjoy doing it, but it takes a lot of my time. I have a Patreon account, which is just like Patronite, but it's just more accessible to non-Polish people. Patronite's just for Polish people, whereas Patreon can be paid in whatever currency you have, and I think it'll even be in Polish if you want. So if you'd like to support me, you can become a Patreon member for something like 25, as little as 25 zloty a month. The price of a nice coffee. Thanks a lot.